So Gabriel Rockhill, you are first of all, are you still in academia? They have not forced you out yet.
Yeah, I'm still in
They
academia.
Oh, that gives me a little bit that makes me feel a little good, to be honest with you. I
Well, me
feel
too. I've got to pay the bills. I've got kids. I mean, there's a lot of good reasons for me to be in academia.
well, I just feel like, I can count on one hand how many radical academics I know that are still in it, at least in this country, the US. And
100%.
yeah, so whatever I know, like, okay, there's still Richard Wolff's still there, Gabriel
Yeah,
Rockhill's still there. There's still a handful that gives me a little bit of hope.
agreed. And we need more of them.
Oh yeah. Well, so let's start there. I was an academic in a different lifetime. I got out after masters, and looking at the direction it's going. I mean, first of all, with the whole student loan crisis, I think that higher education in the United States, at least, is becoming solely reserved for the elite. I think it's incredibly dangerous. I think the state of the academy is just straight up frightening. I never thought it would get this bad. And this is coming from a guy who in 2012 kind of got out of the game. And one of the reasons was I feel like this is just a corporation with textbooks. So, what is your take on the state of academia? Do you have hope for it in the United States going forward into the future, especially as somebody who does split their time abroad?
It's a complicated question because you're absolutely right. It's a corporation with textbooks, and also it's a real estate corporation and a corporation with investments. And so the US Academy is bound up with the capitalist system very deeply. And it's also bound up with a history of US imperialism and justifying that imperialism in various ways. And so I don't see a big kind of, how to put it, firewall between the academy and the rest of society, if it be the kind of social issues or politics and economics. And so the current state of the academy, I think, in the US reflects in many ways the current state of the United States, which is an empire that is having a lot of trouble keeping itself stitched together due to the fact that capitalist crises are kind of ongoing at various levels, from housing to unemployment to healthcare and everything else. And that is combined with a world situation that's very quickly changing because of the inability of the US empire to exercise its dominion in the same way that it used to, at least both militarily, economically, etc. And so I think within that broader context, the US Academy is also kind of dwindling to a certain extent in its prominence internationally. I think it's within the last 2 or 3 years that the number of references to the top reviewed publications in the hard sciences, now the Chinese publications have surpassed US publications or European publications. It's a very powerful, university system there. And I think that reflects as well a kind of dwindling on the part of the US Academy. Maybe the last thing that I'd say is that in relationship to the general political state of affairs, it is somewhat interesting because there is, and that's where I have not only hope, because hope can be vapid and uninteresting, but a certain amount of materialist optimism, is that there's a lot of young people with interests in opening up the spectrum of ideas beyond the spectrum that I was introduced to as a student, which I'd refer to as kind of boomer ideology. There's this thing called capitalism. It's great. It's a free world, et cetera. And there's this other thing that's just awful, and it's called socialism or communism, or, people use different terms for it. And it's all just horrible and dictatorial and drenched in blood. Most young people today are faced with a world in which the capitalist world doesn't hold a future for them that is exactly like a shining path. And so they're looking elsewhere and opening up in various ways. And you see that both in students, grad students, young faculty. So I think that if there's a greater mobilization on the part of these people, then I think that we can begin to hopefully push the academy more in the direction of being what at least it says that it is, and that is that it's a free realm for the exploration of ideas. Well, let's explore all ideas, like ideas that might help us, seriously engage with the problems that we're faced with and actually put forth solutions that are real material solutions.
Well, then, to any future radical academics who are out there, what's your advice? How do you stay out of trouble? How do you find the good trouble and stay out of the bad kind?
Well, you have to navigate it like anything, like union organizers, like militants who are working various jobs, like lawyers who do their corporate job, but also are doing pro bono work on the side. Like uh, being a class trader is something that a lot of people have expertise in above and beyond my own experiences. And I think that you have to try to, as much as possible, understand where the extant play of forces is, and not overstep certain bounds, because if you do, then you will be banished very quickly. And if you can maintain at least 1 foot within certain systems, because we could also talk about the entertainment industry, right? I know that you have a lot of
Absolutely.
experience and could talk at length about that. If you can keep a little toe or a foot within certain elements of the entertainment industry in order to be able to use it to your benefit while maintaining some level of integrity and some principles while doing that, then you might be able to use the kind of power of the monster against itself, so to speak. Well, at the same time, I would say, actually, I'm working on a book right now with Jennifer Ponce de Leon where we spell some of this out. I think there are really 3 tactics that cultural producers use. One is the one that I just mentioned, is that a kind of Trojan horse. Like you use the institution or the entertainment industry and you try to smuggle in a different message, but you use its enormous power to get your message across, which I do with a university or with publishing houses or journal publications and things like this. But another very important thing is to develop an alternative apparatus, our own system of production, circulation, and consumption of ideas and of culture. And I run the Critical Theory Workshop, which is an educational nonprofit. I began in 2008. That's one of our goals, is to have our own system of operations. And the third is ultimately leveraging power fully away from the capitalist system by establishing a kind of socialist apparatus that is such that the production of culture is in the hands of the people instead of the hands of the corporate overlords. So those are at least 3 tactics that I think are particularly important, and we can do all 3 or support all 3 at the same time.
Do you consider yourself a class trader?
If by class trader we mean someone who would be objectively situated as a member of the professional managerial class stratum in the imperial core, which most people would identify a university professor like myself as being, while at the same time politically, socially situating myself on the side of the oppressed and exploited masses of humanity on planet Earth, then yes, absolutely.
Interesting. Yeah. See, I don't know if I would put university professor in there, but I guess it's all just a judgment call, right?
Well, it depends on the kind of nature of class analysis, though, too.
Hmm.
And university professors, at least historically, have often been situated within that professional managerial class stratum.
Hmm.
Some of them are paid it's not my case, but some of them are paid extremely well in order to produce the dominant ideology and to go on TV shows and back the U.S. intervention in the Ukraine, or U.S. backed proxy war in the Ukraine, or other such things. Many others are paid a little bit less just to try to basically indoctrinate the next generation into the dominant ideology. And so I understand the professional managerial class stratum as a kind of buffer between the capitalist ruling class that owns the means of production, the means of communication, the means of distribution, and on the other hand, all the people who are working to actually produce the values in society, the goods and services. And so the PMC stratum is, they're working for the overlords, and a lot of them like to have the illusion that they're nonetheless on the right side of history and they're serving the general population, et cetera. But it's very rare, as you said in your kind of critique of the lack of radical academics, it's very rare to find people that are actually materially invested in being on the side of the people. Most of them are invested in creating the illusion that they're on the side of the people so they can benefit from all of the symbolic rewards that go along with that.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that I like that. That's a cool way of unpacking it. So my next question, ironically enough, you kind of led into it, but I wanted to ask you more specifically about critical theory and the critical theory workshop. You already touched upon it naturally. So I guess, instead of just delivering my next question, I'll just say, could you go into a little more detail about the critical theory and the critical theory workshop? What is it exactly?
Well, critical theory historically was developed in Europe as a kind of its best version is an attempt to make theory relevant to real social and political struggles. That history, particularly within the European context, has been such that many of the self-proclaimed critical theorists, if your viewers and listeners are familiar with Adorno and Horkheimer of the Frankfurt School, or of major French theorists like Michel Foucault or Jacques Derrida or others of this sort, I have argued in my scholarship that they failed in that task, meaning that they generally have not produced meaningful theories that help elucidate the world and orient working people. They've instead engaged largely in obscurantism and often in capitalist accommodation and even imperialist support. And so the work that I've been doing with the Critical Theory Workshop as an educational nonprofit is to try to kind of put the substance back into critical theory and to mobilize the world of ideas for its real use value to working people. So we shouldn't just be, constructing elaborate word bridges and kind of colossal theoretical constructs in our minds that are so obtuse that average people can't understand them. We should instead be using the time and resources that we have as academics, for instance, in order to investigate the real nature of the world and unpack it in such a way that it can be explainable to the masses of workers, many of whom don't have that luxury, right? Because prior to being an academic, I spent a lot of time working construction or other odd jobs. And you come home from work, you're exhausted. Are you going to sit down and crack a 700-page book on the history of capitalism? Hopefully, but it would be much better if you could find a little compendium written by a radical academic that in 20 or 25 pages would explain the history of capitalism in a way that's accessible and that's actionable as well, so that you can not only understand the world, but ultimately contribute to transforming it in a more egalitarian direction.
Well, I just think that's such valuable work, especially today. When you look at something like the online left and things like that, there's a certain stigma that exists because there is, there is a portion of people that just, oh, let's just read theory, and then when we're done, read more theory. And there's a certain frustration where it's been like, well, have you ever shown up to anything? Have you ever? When's the last time you left your basement? And then on the same note, there's just the notion that, but this theory is valuable. These books have a lot of value that can be applied in the struggles we face now. So I mean, as an individual, I find myself a little bit in between, and I'd imagine you do as well. So it's have you found that it's been successful in building that bridge?
Definitely. The way I would describe it is that there's a difference between theory that has exchange value, meaning theory that is marketable, trendy, hip, gets lots of likes on social media, sells a lot of books. Slavoj Žižek would be a good example of that, and he's a pseudo-theorist whom I have attacked quite directly on this front, because I'd juxtapose theory with exchange value, theory that can be monetized, to theory with use value. Michael Parenti would be a great example of someone who has really done an excellent job of elucidating the history of US politics, and for that matter, foreign affairs as well, in such a way that average people can understand it and they can act on it. And in my own experience, I was trained originally in a very highfalutin form of obtuse French theory, and did my PhD in France under some of the kind of leading luminaries of these traditions. So what I was supposed to do with my life is become a kind of guru in this exchange value driven theory world. And it wasn't working out because I kept reading this theory. And given that I have a working class background, I grew up on a farm, I've always been invested in radical politics, I wanted to make it relevant. And it just became increasingly clear to me that it was completely irrelevant. And my work over the last, I don't know how long it's been now, maybe 6 to 10 years, has really pivoted much more clearly to theory with use value. And the rewards are obvious in the sense that I've been involved with a whole series of activist campaigns that have been successful. I've been involved in public political education that has been very successful. And I've also just really connected with both my roots and where I'm coming from, and other working class people and young people who are facing a world where they need ideas and they need theory, because you have to be able to frame your experience in a broader world, right? You can't just, if you just go through the world and you're, on social media and stopping by 7-Eleven to get coffee, and, you don't have a higher view on what it exactly is that you're experiencing it and why the world is the way that it is. And so you need theory in order to do that. And I'm a very, very strong believer in the power of theory to abstract from the immediacy of our experience, so that you can, situate your consumer experience within something like capitalism, and capitalism within the deep history of the colonial expansion of Europe and other such things.
Hold on, I think my cat wants to get on the lap here.
All right.
She wants
We
to
got a
say
cat
hi.
question?
I don't know if you could hear her, but are you a cat guy too?
I don't have cats, but I love
Okay.
cats and I love dogs. I don't really choose much between them because my sons both really love dogs.
Oh, I
So,
love them both too, but yeah,
okay.
but I have a cat. But yeah, well, Lucy says hi. But well, I think also like going on your answer, right, you're also, you do show by example somebody who, can talk the theory, but you also walk the walk constantly, which I want to kind of get into. But first, what does it mean to you when you say I am a communist? What does that mean, especially in 2023?
Well, it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So the way that I would put it is that if you know the history of capitalism, then you should know that there has been a world historical struggle that is now centuries old to overcome capitalism by establishing an alternative socioeconomic and political system. And that social and economic system and the political system is based, at least in principle, on the maximization of equality, so that the economic means of production wouldn't be owned by corporate overlords, they would be owned by the people. And that politically, that would lead, at least over time, to an increased substantive democratization. And in that regard, it is, the term communism can lend itself to some misunderstandings. The world that we're in right now is not a world of communism, it's a world of socialism. And socialism is the struggle to overcome the capitalist system and begin establishing the foundations for a more egalitarian society. And at this point in history, we're in the preliminary stages of this. Capitalism, depending on who you read and how you situate yourself in these debates, took many centuries to develop out of feudalism, and there are still feudal remnants within the capitalist world system. And so we're only about 100 years into the socialist project. And for me in 2023, it means being a supporter of the very hard, difficult struggle to develop socialism out of a dominant system, which is capitalism currently, in order to establish not only a more egalitarian world, but another big part of the long history of socialism is a more ecologically sustainable world, so that human beings in the natural world, including your cat, can live in greater harmony than the world that we currently have, which is a world in which the ecological collapse is already upon us and is getting more and more intensified due to the way in which capitalism maximizes profit at the expense not only of people, but also of nature.